we will move forward with the regular agenda, so I will call the meeting to order. And Gina, could you please call the roll?
Chair Andrews?
Here.
Commissioner Dixon?
Here.
Commissioner Wallace?
Here.
Commissioner Strauss? Absent. Commissioner Wilwood?
Here. Okay, thank you. We do have a couple of folks who want to make public testimony today. Silas, COVID, Keith, and is it Mark?
You want to stand or you guys want to sit up here at the table for your comments?
Thanks for coming. I'd like to remind you we have a 3-minute limit for testimony this morning, but I appreciate you taking the time to come all the way out here on a wet day and visit with us at Leach.
Actually, it's really, really close for me. I live about 10 blocks from here.
Shouldn't have told everyone that.
So my name is Mark White. I'm president of the Palhurst-Gilbert Neighborhood Association. If you're not familiar with that, it begins just on the other side of Foster Road, in between essentially Pal Butte and 104th, all the way out to 82nd between Division and Pal. About 30% of our neighborhood lies within the Glens Town Center urban renewal area. So we've been a part of an urban renewal area for about 15 years. Within that time, our neighborhood has changed quite dramatically. In the 15 years we've been a part of urban renewal, the free and reduced lunch rate has gone from about 38% to about 80% in just those 15 years. The movement of communities of color from North and Northeast Portland due to gentrification has greatly improved, rather not improved, but increased the population within our neighborhood. And we still have more unpaved roadways than any other in the city. We have 6 or 7 of the most dangerous intersections in the city, including the single most dangerous intersection in the state of Oregon, which is 122 in Powell, just up the street. Needless to say, tremendous amount of effort is needed to kind of stabilize and then revitalize our neighborhood. We have asked for the purchase of a property at 122nd near Herald and have been rejected, and that's why I'm here, is to ask that you reconsider that. The property in question already has a project. It's a multi-use project. It includes an effort to prevent displacement from gentrification. It is going to be targeting housing money for seniors, most likely veterans, and hopefully integrate those veterans into the community to better move them from active service to being in the general population. But it also has an extremely heavy economic development component. Part of that is an international marketplace. So there's retail and other commercial on the bottom, and then the international marketplace, which I usually refer to as a hybrid between Saturday market and the food court scene that we have in the city. So very small areas for jumping off micro enterprise opportunities for folks. And that's really the gist of why I'm here. It can be a total game changer for us. And I'd like to point out 2 things. One, in the 15 years that we've been a part of the urban renewal area, we have never once asked for a specific piece of property to be purchased for revitalization. And second, along 122nd, as you are already aware of, there's going to be sidewalks and bioswales put in. So the 125 feet in front of this piece of property is going to be upgraded. So the value of that property, whether or not we're able to bring something to fruition, will hopefully increase in value quite substantially. And whether or not the Portland Housing Bureau does just housing down the road, or whether or not the PDC ends up having to sell that property, will still be able to make a profit because that value will have increased because of those sidewalks. So I'd really just like to implore you to reconsider that and to help us teach people how to fish. Because that's one of the things that I think has really been missing in revitalization in this city, is that we just give people fish. We don't teach them to fish. And that's one of the things that this project is going to do, because it's going to get people who, for the most part, are totally subsidized by government. And we're going to give them the opportunity, teach them how to be their own business people, and hopefully move from that little stall to a food cart, or to a restaurant, or to a small office, to a bigger office, to a company. That's what we want to do, because the people who live here, even though most of them have been forced to move here, those are the people that we want to choose to be a part of our neighborhood when it comes time for them to own a home. So those are the kinds of folks who are most important when it comes to building up a community, because they choose to live in that area. They're not forced to live in that area because it's the only thing that they can afford. So the sidewalks are great and all those things, but everything gets down to people. You can't revitalize a community unless you begin with people, and I think that's what Gilbert Place does, and I'm hoping that you will see that. I got a call from the real estate agent yesterday while I was working doing painting stuff, wanting to know what the status was, and I would love to be able to call them back and say, you know, I actually know something. So I hope that you will reconsider it, and that's it for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
He kind of said everything. I would think to say. Just to add on to that, I lived in this area in between Powell and Foster my entire life, and I'm a community development major at PSU. I'm trying to specialize in asset-based community development, hoping to work in the outer southeast area around here. And this project nails most of the most important components of asset-based community development, which focuses on developing the community through the means that are there, using the people that are there so that they can bring themselves up rather than depending on other sources. And one of the important parts of asset-based community development is that to start off, you need to ask for some assistance from the city, and getting the money to acquire this land would be that little bit that we needed. And there are other nonprofit developers that are ready to help us with this project that are in our area. And it'd be huge for the entire community if we could build a project for ourselves that would generate revenue in the area and employ people in the area. And it would just be great for the entire spirit of the East. That's about it.
Thank you. Okay, thanks very much. Actually, timely presentations as part of our discussion today. Early part of our discussion today will be a review of the budget process for next year. So we are already beginning to make some prioritization of funding for our next fiscal year, and I'm sure that this will be included in it. So now we'll move on to the regular agenda. There are 3 action items. We were planning on dealing with them as a single report at least. We could vote on them individually if you like, but that's not necessary. We have Resolution 6981, authorizing a Veterans Memorial Coliseum operating agreement with the City of Portland, authorizing a Veterans Memorial Coliseum license agreement with Portland Winterhawks. Resolution 6982, authorizing an option agreement granting PDC the right to transfer of certain real property interests within the Rose Quarter from the City of Portland. And then Resolution 6983, authorizing the Veterans Memorial Coliseum project funding agreement to provide up to $2 million in contingent funding for the Veterans Memorial Coliseum renovation. We've talked about this a lot of times. I would remind you that I got involved with this when the mayor asked Charles and I in October of 2009 to review the Citizens Advisory recommendations with regard to the future of Veterans Memorial Coliseum. At that point, there were 3 finalists. There was a group of architects that were working on turning it into a school. There was Doug Oblett's MARC concept, and then there was the concept of renovating Memorial Coliseum. And the mayor wanted to see if we could get some cooperation between the parties, if there was some way to include pieces of some of the project, include the school, include some of the physical stuff. 1, and 2, if that wasn't the case, to make a recommendation as to what we thought was the most viable concept. We spent a couple of months meeting with folks. Nobody wanted to share They wouldn't play in the same sandbox together, so we had to decide between which one of the concepts was the best. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what we found was there was very little there with regard to the school program. It was based on a grant from the Gate Foundation of $25 million, which, you know, there was a letter of interest attached, and that was it. And although the mark was very, very well planned and laid out, and he did a tremendous amount of work, it relied on both a huge amount of fundraising, I think $50 million, as well as a huge bond, and at the end of the day would leave the city at risk, if we couldn't find somebody else, for operating losses on a huge athletic facility. I mean, just to give you a sense, the Multnomah Athletic Club is a 500,000 square foot facility. It's probably bigger, but not a heck of a lot bigger than this one. It has a $30 million annual budget. So you're not talking a small amount of operating revenues necessary to make something like that go. So we made our recommendation. The Citizens Advisory Committee came back, and I would say on a consensus basis agreed with it. So that process wrapped up, and we began working on actually putting together the deal to renovate it. The three items in front of us, so that's the item number one. We are going to have a staff presentation. Item number two, originally in the term sheet that was provided to you several months ago with regard to this, there was talk about transferring development rights to certain parcels of land in the Rose Quarter. That quickly changed to actually transferring fee title from these city-owned lots. And there was a couple of reasons for that. One, we were being asked to potentially back up Winterhawks funds if they weren't paid on time. And two, it was seen as a potential non-TIF funding source for us in the year 2023 if there were actual operating losses. Second, and in my mind even more importantly, we are the right people to have the title to that land, because especially as we've done due diligence, I'm convinced that they would not get developed in the hands of OMF. They're just not in that business. They don't think, they're not interested in taking on risk. And if we truly want the Rose Quarter to be the bustling business and housing district that we'd like to see it, with that land in the hands of PDC, who's motivated to actually get something done and create revenue and jobs and buildings, that's the right place for it to go. It is now presented as an option, and that is at our request, because quite frankly, as we have gotten into these properties, we have not had the time to do what I would call proper due diligence to make sure that these properties have the value that we expect that they do. As we got into it, there are operating agreements on some of the land. There are some environmental issues on some of the land. There's an amazing amount of utilities underground in some of them. So what this would do for us, if City Council also agrees to it, would put us in the driver's seat in terms of doing that due diligence and making sure that we weren't taking on something that would cost us money instead of being a positive asset for us. The last piece, again, has to do with, I'm going to call it a belt and suspenders approach, and it would just have to do with if somehow we got into the project and the Winterhawks stopped the funding, and this was really based on a concept that changed recently where the Winterhawks would only fund at the point where we were 50% into the construction process or 75% committed. Now the agreement, although it is not signed off on, would be that that last payment would be no later than the 1st of July. So this is actually the $2 million we have set aside for district energy, which would go into the Veteran Memorial Coliseum mechanical upgrade if district energy didn't happen. It would be available if somehow the construction process provided that there was about $23 million worth of no, more than that, over $25 million worth of commitments, which we're not going to get to. And we would get paid back this money out of the guarantee, and we would also own the Winterhawks if they walked away from it. So this is, like I say, it's kind of I think it's very unlikely that we would get into a situation where this would happen. We would get it repaid, but nonetheless, it's remained part of the package just to help Pam in particular feel comfortable on taking the role without getting the $10 million all up front. With that, unless there are kind of any general questions, we'll have Peter England.
Did you want to make your announcement?
Yeah, I guess I'll.
Oh, sure.
make my
Sorry, I forgot.
Declaration here. So I am declaring a potential conflict of interest on 2 of the 3 matters to be discussed. I'm an officer at Coles Construction, and if the Veterans Memorial Coliseum project proceeds, there is a possibility that Coles Construction may be awarded some part of the work involved in the renovation. Although I have not been informed that at this time there is no actual conflict of interest. I've decided nonetheless to recuse myself from participating in the 1st and 3rd matters before the board, both of which involve directly or indirectly the funding of the Coliseum project. On advance of counsel, I have been informed that I do not have either an actual or potential conflict of interest with regard to the 2nd matter before the board, and will thus participate in this matter.
Okay, so we will split them into 3 pieces.
Lou Bowers, Central City. I thought your history was very helpful. Just one step back, the commission knows there was a decision to put the building on the historic register. And the Merck proposal also was inconsistent with that because of the bowl in the box. So that decision actually drove much of your analysis of those options, what could work given the historic status. I think the commission knows that, but I think it helps to frame the constraints that we're working under.
Another one of the constraints. Thank you. Okay, Peter and Eric.
Chair Andrews, members of the Commission, Peter Englander, and Executive Director Quinn. I'm Peter Englander, Central City Manager. I am joined this morning in the presentation by both our Chief General Counsel, Eric Iverson, as well as outside counsel, Mike Ryan. Mike helped us significantly on a number of the matters here. We were also helped by John Goodwin from Miller Nash on the other matter, the option agreement. I was also supported by every staff member in this room. The highest levels were involved in moving all of these actions forward, and I'm very much indebted to everybody who's really helped us move this process to this point today. I'm going to very briefly go through this entire presentation because, as Chair Andrews has said, there's a lot that we've done, and the introduction to a great deal of it. These are the actions that you've taken to date. This has included authorizing an architectural and engineering contract, as well as 2 intergovernmental agreements, the first of which is in place now and with which we have spent some resources, which I believe Chair Andrews mentioned. I'll talk about a little bit later. And we've also continued to pay for legal services for the city to make sure that this redevelopment agreement that I will also discuss reaches its conclusion. In August, you also authorized the executive director to negotiate, much of which we're talking about today as well. And briefly, I just want to remind you that all of this took place after a significant public process. The chair mentioned a lot of it, but there were 3 basic groups that were involved in this. There was a stakeholder advisory committee that the mayor convened that met 17 times. There were over 30 members. Commissioner Wilhoit was involved in the community benefits subcommittee that also met 5 times and came up with a community benefits framework that is part of our option agreement today. And the Veterans Focus Group has met a number of times and is still meeting. And I'd like to tell you that they are very, very interested in embarking and announced last week that they are embarking on a $2.5 million fundraising campaign to substantially improve and, if they're successful in their stretch goal, maintain into the future a Veterans Memorial Garden, which is quite impressive. We've talked a lot already about the actions that are in front of you today, as well as what's going to be in front of City Council this afternoon. City Council will be looking at the redevelopment agreement itself, as well as a second amendment to the Portland Arena Management Operating Agreement. The project funding agreement is something that we will talk about this morning as well as the option and the city operating agreement. So those will be discussed this afternoon as well. We originally felt that this entire matter had to be approved together as a package. Whether you voted on it individually or not, I think at this point that's something that is certainly up for discussion as well. The whole reason that we've embarked on this over the last 16 months and really what happened after all of this public process, the 4 partners, 2 public, 2 private partners, went into negotiations for an extended period of time to come up with a redevelopment agreement. That is the mechanism by which the Portland Development Commission money through an intergovernmental agreement gets transferred to the city. The city is a part of this redevelopment agreement, in addition to the Portland Winterhawks for their $10 million investment, and Portland Arena Management, who has offered to be the construction manager and was awarded a sole source ordinance in about a year ago. So that they'll be able to go ahead and manifest the construction of this project. What we've done so far is we've completed the schematic design, which has come up with our project scope at this point. We have done some construction. There is a new ice floor in the Veterans Memorial Coliseum today. It's beautiful. I just saw it 2 nights ago. That was done under the original intergovernmental agreement and was mentioned as if this project does not move forward, there is a mechanism by which that money would be repaid back to PDC. We anticipate that if things go forward, that there will be continued design next year, as well as the beginning of construction, as well as construction the following year as well. The scope has not changed. This is the scope that you saw late this summer. It's based on the schematic design. We had to do a few adjustments, but that's what you saw before in order to make the scope fit the budget. This is the base project. As I mentioned, the first item is already completed, and these other items have been in the scope a long time. As you know, a lot of this project is mechanical and electrical and plumbing upgrades of a 50-year-old facility, but it also includes some things that hopefully will be very enhancing for anybody who visits the Coliseum, including new scoreboard and new seats and better concessions. If we are able to complete the project efficiently, the contingency money could be spent on some additions or alternates, and they are listed here as well. So now we're going to go through each of the actions individually. And the first one is the operating agreement and license agreement. The purpose of PDC entering into an operating agreement and license agreement for the years 2023 through 2033 was to satisfy a requirement by the Portland Winterhawks that they are ensured the ability to be able to play in the Coliseum for the next 20 years. Portland Arena Management, through all of these negotiations, have stepped up to commit, if this all goes forward, to operate the facility for another 10 years. That is a change from when we started. They were originally only willing to commit to 5. They are now willing to commit to 10. So now we have a continuum of 20 years of management of the building. As Chair mentioned, we saw this as a business opportunity. I think the likely scenario is if we find ourselves as the operator in the event that Portland Arena Management chooses not to operate the building, they do have the first right to do so. So we are really a backup operator, and so the agreement is a backup operating agreement and a backup license agreement with the Hawks. We would likely hire someone else to manage this facility. So I suspect that would be the situation. We'll have to see what things are like in 10 years.
Well, I was going to ask you that, and I didn't want to interrupt, but there's a lot of information. Is that something new since we looked at this last time, as far as PDC being qualified to operate? Because I thought it was our intention from day one that we would contract that out.
It's not new. I think it's always been assumed, Commissioner, that we would hire somebody to do it. We did want to get some legal opinions about our ability to at least be an oversight and take on the operating agreement itself.
Okay.
But I think it's always been anticipated that we would likely hire somebody with the expertise in managing the facility to do this, to do so.
The board opinion was primarily to state, yes, we have the authority or within our charter to actually play this role. It wasn't a statement about our qualifications to manage it, and I think we all, future PDC management, because it'll be 10 years out, we'll make the determination, but I think our assumption is that we'll hire a third party to manage.
Okay.
So,
Thanks.
So as the executive director just says, we have obtained legal opinion that we have the legal authority to do this.
Okay.
So that opinion is in your packet as well. Here's some other items here that have contained our risks. One of the ones that we felt was pretty important, and this was part of the letter agreement and term sheet that you saw back in August, is that the city is committing to a $375,000 budget each year that would be grown from the first year by inflation for capital improvements. So as this facility ages from the improvements that we're making now, we have a larger commitment 10 years out from the city if we are to operate this building to continue to invest in the building. We've also negotiated with the city per the letter agreement net operating losses that would be reimbursed up to $375,000 per year. That does not grow with inflation. That would stick with $375,000. So we would expend that money and then get reimbursed some portion from the city, and as recently negotiated, some portion from the Winterhawks. I want to note to you, and Mike Ryan can speak to this as well, that those negotiations are still underway under the license agreement. So the action before you today is a finished operating agreement, but we are still negotiating the license agreement, and there may be some fluctuation in what PDC's participation may be in that $375,000. Chair Andrews has been involved in this as well, but this was what the letter agreement said. So that is still a matter that will be determined by the executive director if you take action today that goes into effect.
And how did we arrive at 375,000 as the number for capital improvements?
It was a negotiated agreement. There is a $250,000 number in the current agreement, and we knew it needed to be substantially larger at the 10-year point.
What kind of depreciation historically are we talking about?
Well, it's kind of difficult because you have a 50-year-old facility that was not maintained in the way that you would expect that it would. So you're talking about currently having literally mechanical, electrical systems, freight elevator, an ice floor that were 50 years old. So one of the things that's going to happen with this renovation that shows up a big time in the consultant's report about is that the efficiency of the operation. I mean, it's going to use a lot less energy. It's going to need a lot less maintenance because all of the major stuff is going to be replaced. But nonetheless, what we would believe is this would at least cover kind of the maintenance costs, and we're hoping, because they actually commit to carry over, if we don't use the 375 in any one year, that amount carries over to the next. What we're hopeful is that we'll be able to build up a big enough fund of money that we could actually make some real capital improvement to it, do some things that would drive more business.
Yeah, prior reports and the most current analysis showed that there were a number of enhancements that we could have done to increase the flexibility of the building so that we could use the facility for additional kinds of events and make more money. Most of those didn't go into the budget, and so as the chair mentioned, as long as we're able to maintain the building in the proper way, and maintenance costs are part of operating costs, but any capital improvements beyond that, structural repairs, would have to be handled by this $375,000 that the city was willing to budget, and it is an increase over the $250,000 they agreed to do for the first 10 years. We have the option under these agreements to operate the building solely for the Winterhawks and events that are defined as special events and community events. Special events include events that the building is used for and was designed for, such as the Rose Festival, Parade, Oregon State athletic events, as well as high school graduations. And then community events are are more events that are sponsored by nonprofit organizations and that are currently in the facility at this point. These were very important to city commissioners as well. And so there is an ability in the event that we feel that the building can't operate profitably with other events, that we could operate the building solely for these events that you see here. And the financial analysis, worst case scenario, contemplates this exact possibility and what the net operating losses may look like in the event that is the scenario. We don't have to go forward with this if the Winterhawks don't exercise their option. In the redevelopment agreement, not only is Portland Arena Management committing to operate the building for the next 10 years, but the Winterhawks are signing up for a 10-year license agreement. They also have 2 5-year options beyond that, and it is in a situation where they exercise those options that PDC would be obligated to step in as operator in the event that Portland Arena Management chooses not to exercise their options to continue to operate the building. But if the Winterhawks don't, then we don't have to take on this responsibility. So that is built into the agreement as well. And then lastly, an agreement with the city that our license with the Winterhawks must be similar to the license that Portland Arena Management would have negotiated as well. So there can't be too much variation in what the Winterhawks would see under our license versus our sub-license versus the Portland Arena Management sub-license.
Does that note with regard to community events expose the facility to just demand from the community to say, we want to use this, you're using our money to take care of it? How is that going to be handled, if that question makes sense? So if groups just come and say, we need a facility, and it's a city property and we put our money into it, we don't want to pay for that. How does that work?
Well, I'm going to speak to the first part, and I want Mike to speak to the second part. The first part is that when we run the facility for special events, we can make modest charges to not only cover operating costs, but to make a small profit. With community events, we can charge to at least cover our costs. Your second question is, how much can it be used for community events? And I believe in prior operating agreements there had been a schedule arranged, and how did we finally negotiate that?
In the prior agreements, there was a schedule. In this agreement, we've agreed to attempt to do up to 10 community events a year. The community events would be the toy drive. And with the special events, there's no obligation to do any fixed number of them. But things like the Rose Festival Parade, the OSAA events, we would do as many of those as are reasonable, and on those we get to charge reasonable rental rates, so we aren't exposed to losing money on those.
So it's market rate, reasonable rental rates, and cost coverage. Those are kind of the 3 different tiers.
And the reason I'm asking is, and I appreciate the answer, the use of the building, it touches on the performance of ownership. And if I'm the Winterhawks or the city, and they say, well, you're reimbursed up to $375,000 for net operating losses, but some of those losses had nothing to do with us. How's that considered? And I guess you told me we have up to 10 community events, and we can charge to cover costs, but I don't know how that would play out if there are events and I'm on the hook to cover operating losses, and I say, well, the loss is related to other things.
Well, I would say that OMF believed it was just as important as City Council did that this remain available to the community, and this is no change to the current operating agreement. As long as we're charging a break-even amount, the more community events that we put in it, from their standpoint, the better.
And so that's clear to the Winterhawks?
Yes.
I mean, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the Winterhawks agreement does provide, because they schedule a year in advance, that they've got the ability to lock up times, which they have to be able to do, obviously. But the arena has always been managed around that kind of a situation. And usually, those a graduation can be moved from a Wednesday night to a Thursday night, or those things can be moved around so that they're not conflicting with a money-making event. And it's not been a problem to date.
As part of our work in getting to this point, we, at your request, performed a study that Johnson Reed did for us of a projected operating performance. That analysis is in your board packet as well. As the report notes, we were asking an economist to project out 10 to 20 years how this building was going to operate. As you might imagine, those kinds of projections are not precise. Nonetheless, the analysis showed that under any scenario, our operating losses do not exceed that $375,000 reimbursement. I want to note, however, that the current draft of the sublicense has these slightly different terms, so there may be some exposure. We have to remember that this is an imprecise, but at least it gives you an order of magnitude of how this building might operate. It was based on 10 years of actual information and assumptions made on how the building might operate differently. But they were very conservative. Johnson Reed was very conservative in how they treated a $31.5 million investment. So under the most optimistic scenario, the building can make some money. Under the baseline scenario, it was done in a very, very conservative way, and it's essentially in a break-even mode, and that takes into account our oversights. It takes into account not only us hiring a manager, but staff costs for us to oversee that manager as well. So when you build in all of those costs, it's essentially just below break-even, or just loses a small amount of money in the order of magnitude.
Now, with assuming the worst case scenario, the sanctions that the Winterhawks have been hit with, do they have concern about their economic viability if those sanctions hold? And I'm assuming that couldn't have been factored into the analysis that was done because it just happened.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't factored into the analysis. The sanctions, as I understand them today, last for a period of 5 years, most severely this coming up year, and then they trailed off. But we really don't know what impact that would have in the long run. So that's something that we would all have to consider. And it's a matter of all of our judgment as to whether that's going to have a long-term impact that will affect the facility 10 years down the road.
Yep, and that's the reason why the Winterhawks have said that they didn't want to sign the funding agreement today. They need a few weeks to themselves work through what they think that the impacts are going to be to the organization. I think you could probably argue for the coming year they might even have a higher attendance, but once the sanctions take effect and they start not being able to be competitive, there's probably a couple of years in there where there's a problem. So that's one of the things that they want to look to over these next couple of weeks.
And I know, as commissioners, I don't know how much of their private information that we've seen from an operating and financial perspective, but do we have the right or the ability to ask them to model what they think they're going to look like, assuming the worst case with their with their penalties, and roll that into what we've already seen somehow?
Yeah, we have a baseline projection in terms of what they expected to happen over the next 10 years, and then we extrapolated from that, and we could ask them to make a guess as to how that might impact it. I think the important part is that the big sanction is year one, and then they're smaller for the next 4 years, and then they disappear. So it's a real guessing game. I think there's a much greater impact, obviously, in the first 5 years, long before we're operating it.
I would imagine if I'm management there, I have to do that anyway. From a financial operating perspective, they're going to do that. So I think given that this operating loss situation is something that could impact us financially, they have asked us for a couple of weeks. I think that's what they're doing right now. That's what I would be doing. So I think it's a key consideration for me to kind of get some sense, because I haven't seen their financial information. I know we see the model, and it shows us that we're not going to top out that 375 cap on operating losses, but
the 307, the worst case scenario in this study was one where we only ran it for the Winterhawks, which really wouldn't happen because you'd always take on events that you knew were going to make money. So it was deliberately set up to say, how bad could this possibly look? But I still think that those interim changes would be worth.
Well, and I'm trying to be tactful in getting to are they financially sound with this hit.
And that's a question nobody knows.
Yeah, because we can commit to this, and in 3 years, if they go the route of the lacrosse team and it's not here anymore, you know, we've committed to a lot of things that we don't really have use for.
But we don't have the obligation to operate the facility because they're not there.
If they're not there. Yeah.
So the operating agreement goes away.
Well, part of it to me is the money we're putting into rehab that building.
Yeah, I mean,
And if they're not gonna be there, you know, we're not thinking about doing this.
Well, I think the other thing that we have found, so it's kind of interesting given the sanctions, was as we were talking with the hockey league itself, they made it pretty clear that there has to be a team in Portland. This is the biggest city, the most visible city, and has been the most prominent and profitable franchise within the system. And so as we were talking to them about the contingencies of getting into what would happen if we somehow ended up owning this, is that going to be okay? I think the response was, yeah, that's okay, but we want to find another owner who's going to keep it in the city of Portland. It is too much of the center of that league.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the option agreement. This is an action that will be presented this afternoon at City Council in a way, as Chair Andrews mentioned, that the city is interested in doing regardless of how everything else happens for all the reasons that we talked about. I'm first going to go over the properties that we've negotiated into this option. It's essentially most of the property, all of the property that isn't under, and actually includes some of the property that's under the ground lease for the Rose Garden itself and one center court. Highlighted in red which those properties are. The Bent lot, and I'll try to use this to point to it, but the Bent lot is a citizen's parking lot that is right on Broadway to the north of the Coliseum itself. The Coliseum is obviously that big square in the middle. That Bent lot currently parks some 90 vehicles. It is heavily used in support of how the Veterans Memorial Coliseum operates. It is used for staging. It is used for the semi-trailers and how they back into unloading into the Coliseum. It has also been used for events in and of itself. It is a property that on one hand is heavily used for these purposes, on the other hand begs for redevelopment. And I think we see it as one of the most valuable pieces in all of the real estate that we have there. The next are the parking garages, the structured parking garages that are the large piece there. Those garages were designed in a way that they could be redeveloped in part without modifying the structural integrity of the garages. There's also significant real estate between the garages themselves and Broadway Weibler right there. So there are some very interesting redevelopment opportunities around the garages. The Wheeler Triangle is the small piece just to the right of that. And one of the reasons that we wanted to look at even small pieces just like this is because there has been significant work over the last 2 years that would change how the Broadway Weibler interchange with Interstate 5 works. Today, southbound traffic onto I-5 and then onto I-84 goes through the Rose Quarter. And the way that a significant public process that we've all talked about before in the Central City 2035 effort, also for the first time had a joint venture with the Oregon Department of Transportation because, as was mentioned about the intersection at 122nd and Powell, this is the most dangerous piece of freeway in the entire Interstate 5 system. And it has been redesigned at a very, very conceptual level so that traffic entering onto Interstate 5 would now enter at Broadway and Weidler, and therefore traffic would no longer go through the Rose Quarter. So there's significant possibility that the entire way that the Rose Quarter works today, from a traffic standpoint, could be very different. I just noticed in the paper today that the Oregon Department of Transportation is moving ahead with that plan. We still think it'll probably take a decade for something like that to happen. This option agreement is a 15-year option agreement, so we might be able to take something like that into consideration. The Phase 2 entertainment complex is a small piece closer to the transit center. There it's a little bit harder to see, but it's the red piece at the bottom. That had been anticipated as a follow-on development for the Rose Garden that was never implemented. So we are going to grab that as part of our option as well. And then in the highly, highly unlikely event that the Veterans Memorial Coliseum is ever demolished in and of itself, this option agreement would also give us ownership of that significant piece of property as well, but only in that particular scenario. The terms of the option are 15 years. We are getting these properties at no cost. As I mentioned, the vent lot and the parking garage, but especially the vent lot, we wanted to make sure that there was a mechanism by which we forced each other to figure out different solutions for that vent lot so that it could be redeveloped. So what this agreement does is it frames the partnership between the city and Portland Arena Management towards figuring that out. And essentially the way that that's done in the option agreement is that for the first 5 years it makes it pretty difficult for us to do anything to that surface parking lot. As I've said to others, the bar is very, very high. But after that, it gives us much more flexibility. So it really forces us all to get together and figure out better solutions. I think Portland Arena Management is interested in this as well. As I think you all know, there was a significant period of time where they had the development rights for the Rose Quarter, and they were certainly looking at a redevelopment of the vent lot as well, and they were taking into consideration how to do that and still hold the grand floral parade through that piece of property. So we've structured this in a way to force us all to work that out. And we also have some commitments on the parking garage as well. They obviously need the parking that's there, and this option agreement requires us to make sure that there is still 98% of the parking that currently exists there and takes into account the possibility of construction and temporary parking.
Are those the east-west garages that you're talking about?
Correct. The east-west structured garages, correct.
And the option, would that transfer the garages themselves, or do we have the land, or what are we really talking about when we look at the parking garage as part of the option?
The parking garage, if we decide to take title to that land, we would actually take a ground lease.
That's what I was.
And then we would sublease back to the city the parking garages, and we would control everything around it, above it.
Because right now, the revenue from the garages is committed elsewhere.
Correct.
Yeah, it's committed to paying off debt in the spectator facilities fund. It's one of the 3 debt obligations that we have today.
How long is that? I mean, that will run indefinitely unless there's a change, and even then, it's going to have to pay out the liability before that revenue is free.
Right. Yes, and I'll tell you, in the Rose Quarter District Plan, and I sat through a lot of the planning sessions, the redevelopment opportunity around the garages is what I would call the low-hanging fruit. It's the stuff that can happen in a relatively short period of time. With the light rail line coming around it, there's a lot more activity, and there is the capability actually to build on the outside edge of those garages without impacting the interior structure, or at least on a very minor basis. So you really have an opportunity to do a retail on the ground floor, maybe very low cost office or apartments up above it that basically take around the skin of it. So that is probably in the next 5 to 10 years the most likely opportunity for us to see something done.
But that's a streetcar that would be adjacent to it.
Streetcar, I'm sorry.
Yeah. And of course, that's one of the beauties of an option, is we wouldn't elect to take it until at the time we had a real development. We knew we had a very succinct idea of what the value was and what could be done there. And even if it didn't work, we could renegotiate it, but we're not obligated to do any of this. But the parking garage does obligate right now that there remain 98% of the parking would remain there. And the
city would have.
The license rights.
We also do have some flexibility because we own some significant parcels just on the other side of Interstate 5, both on Weiler, it's known as the B car rental site. It's a 30,000 square foot unused right now surface parking lot. And that might provide us some flexibility, at least on a temporary basis, to be able to handle how we might want to reconstruct those garages in the event that's what we want to do. And we also still own block 49 to the south, which is part of the whole convention center hotel discussion right now. But I think it's handy that we own those sites pretty close by because of flexibility about the Rose Quarter in general. And I'll tell you, I think it was helpful in explaining that to Portland Arena Management as well, that we've got some other parcels that could be part of a larger development, as do they. The benefits of this option agreement is that it does minimize the risk. As Eric just mentioned, these are options, and we could choose to exercise the option right at the point at which we have a redevelopment. That's a scenario that we would love to see happen so that we're not taking on property management and insurance costs and the like. So it really minimizes risk from that standpoint. As the chair mentioned, this is something that the city wants as well because we are the city's redevelopment experts, so it really puts us in the forefront of finally making some additional redevelopment at the Rose Quarter happen. The Rose Quarter district plan that we have over there on the right is something that got incorporated in the Central City 2035 plan. There are going to be some adjustments to height within the Rose Quarter that I think will be helpful, and it also shows how development in the Rose Quarter itself could stimulate development just outside of it. This shows significant redevelopment to the north on the other side of Broadway that property owners have been interested in over time, as well as the Thunderbird side, which is owned by an affiliate of Portland Arena Management as well. So we hope that this will build upon a relationship and a partnership with the Trailblazers organization and their various other arms. This also, as we've mentioned, presents to us a real resource diversification potential. This is how we can diversify ourselves away from tax increment as a tool, as a funding tool, and find other ways to fund the work that the Portland Development Commission does. If this is approved and becomes effective, our next steps would be continue to do due diligence. We've already started. Their phase 1 environmental has just recently come in, but we would continue to do additional due diligence, and we would commence those district development discussions with the city and Portland Arena Management as quickly as we can. We have a couple of steps to go, of course, but we want to get that started as soon as possible.
Peter, if I could just interrupt. Again, going back even further, Mr. Chair, I'm sure you all remember the original reason we got involved here was to promote more mixed-use development in this district. And the renovation of the VMC was hoped to be the spark plug to get that going. So these sites Peter is talking about are the ones that we've looked at, as well as some private sites across Broadway, as being the real payoff for doing this. The VMC itself is not the goal. It's the redevelopment that it could hopefully lead to. So this option is very consistent with our original motivation and doesn't put us at risk because we can evaluate the feasibility prior to exercising.
And yet the certainty of the Veterans Memorial Coliseum staying there puts this whole area in a much more certain space. So people know what is going to be there and what is not going to be there. And that's what has led to the current condition of the building is the uncertainty with respect to that facility. And this will put the development community on notice that we know what we're doing on this particular piece within the Rose Quarter, and we're eager to see redevelopment into the future. Okay, so we'll go on to the last action, which is the project funding agreement. This is where the Portland Development Commission will reprioritize resources we've already committed to the project. This is not new money. This is money that we had put towards the district energy solution, which we're still working to implement. But in the meantime, this money would be reprioritized in a way to back up the Winterhawk funding arrangement, which is currently what you see on top here. At closing, which may be somewhere in the January, February timeframe, the Winter Hawks under the current project funding agreement would be obligated to put a quarter of their commitment in at that time. And right now, the project funding agreement states that their next $2.5 million would be due at 25% completion. With the ice floor and the design costs we've spent already, we're well along that way. And at this point, their obligation would be to provide that $2.5 million no earlier than April 1st or 25% completion. And we're also working towards an end date that would be similar to the last $5 million of July 1st as well. So by July 1, all the money would be, all the $10 million commitment would be in the project funding account by summer. That's pretty good timing, given the fact that we have been a schematic design for this entire year, and the first order of business is going to be to further the design of the building and get permits. That's going to take a good portion of the first 2 quarters of the calendar year. So July 1st is a pretty good time to have all the resources available to start construction of these different elements. And this has always been considered realistically a 2-year project. And so we kept pushing in many ways the beginning of those 2 years ahead. We have done some work, no doubt, but we still have a fair bit of work to do. And I think the hope in the future is that we'll minimize the amount of time that we'll close the building. But we know that there's going to be a significant amount of design and permitting that has to occur for the first half of the year.
And how much have we put in at this point out of pocket? I know you've put in a lot of time and other people have put in time, but as far as direct costs, the ice floor, legal, external professional consulting, how much have we put in?
I think we've put in, I think we put in close to, if not over $1 million, at least $1 million, if not somewhat above that. We've spent about $550,000 on design. We've spent almost all of that, $600,000 on legal. In addition to that, we've had our own legal costs as well.
How much was
Including the ice floor.
And then the ice floor itself was a little bit over $2 million.
So it's probably 3 plus, I would say.
Yeah.
But the ice,
That's right.
but the ice floor, if this deal didn't come through, is actually a spectator fund obligation and would get repaid to us over time from the spectator fund.
From the spectator.
So that's a city.
Right.
So it's probably about $1.2 million totally at risk, if you will, of soft cost.
Invested to date.
Yeah, so if the deal doesn't go, if this deal doesn't go through, the money that we advanced to date will be paid back to us pursuant to the agreement we approved some months ago.
Yeah, for the hard costs.
For the hard costs.
Yeah.
And they really haven't put in anything yet, the Winter Hawks.
They have probably $500,000 worth of their own legal and technical analysis.
And I'll also note that we won't, even if we feel satisfied with the credit, feel satisfied with the guarantee, feel satisfied with the stock pledge, we wouldn't sign this agreement unless until they made that first $2.5 million contribution. So they will be in 2.5 at the time we would sign.
How much can we put in before February 13th? Is there anything, I mean, it's soft cost between now and February 13th. Well, all I'm trying to get at is hard money that they're going to put in, that's going to be put into the tangible improvement of the building. How much money do we expect we'll spend now, between now and February 13th?
Legal, complete agreements.
Well, and there's, in addition to any more legal costs, which I've already mentioned, when we all agreed, all 4 partners, to public to private, to go ahead with the ice floor, what we authorized was some $4 million in improvements that include the ice floor and some other improvements that could be done prior to the redevelopment agreement being signed. At this point, I think we've spent darn close to the $2 million as the contracts have played out. I can't tell you how much we might spend between now and February, but as Eric Iverson mentioned, whatever money is spent On hard costs, those hard costs are obligations to the spectator fund and would, in the event that we don't close the redevelopment agreement, our current in-place effective intergovernmental agreement obligates the spectator fund to pay us back on terms to be determined. Those terms haven't been determined as of yet. You mentioned earlier, Commissioner, the obligations of the spectator facility fund. It's my understanding that the debt associated with the east and west parking garages will be paid off sometime in 2017, 2018 timeframe. That's one of 3 debt obligations that the spectator fund services, the other 2 being associated with the original PGE Park transaction and then the recent Jellywood transaction. So out of those 3, there'll be 2 left in the next 5 years. The city has represented that the spectator fund has a decent amount of risk in that 5-year period, but then after that debt obligation goes away, then they're in a much different situation.
So I would say we would be obligated for soft costs, but I will tell you our agreements, we are the most far along among all of the parties in terms of having our agreements finalized. The only thing that we are 99.9, we're finalized with our agreement with the Winterhawks. OMF has to review it. The RDA is done. So there's not a heck of a lot more in terms of legal soft costs between now and February. And frankly, I think there is nothing teed up in terms of any other physical improvements at this point. So I don't see much in the way of stuff going out the door on a physical standpoint. And if they did, they would become ultimately repaid to us by OMF.
So there's 2 fundamental components of the project funding agreement action, and the first is this obligation to provide the $2 million if the Winterhawks, for some reason, don't fund as committed. And as I've mentioned, this does not increase our financial commitment to the transaction, so there's no change to the budget. It just reprioritizes resources we had devoted towards district energy. As we've talked about a little bit, the way that we've mitigated the risk of that obligation are the way that the funding agreement is structured, items that are most important to the Winterhawks, such as the $2 million scoreboard, would be scheduled last. So if there was a situation where we found ourselves with not all the resources that the Winterhawks had committed to, we would start cutting parts of the project that were most important to them, and there's some substantial ones that we would be able to cut out of the project. In addition to that, we will be obtaining, along with the city, a guarantee from the Winterhawks owner, and the section action will be our mechanism for accepting a pledge of 100% of the Winterhawks stock as collateral. And so that second action is to authorize the executive director to form the organization we would need to accept that pledge and literally own the hockey team.
And I think I've discussed that with each of you prior to this, that this might be a need for the organization to have such an entity for these kind of purposes. And so to take possession of the stock, we would have to have a different entity. We could take the pledge of it, but without a non-governmental entity, we would not be able to exercise the pledge. We would actually have to sell it in order to realize value from it. This would give us the option to do either. If we had a separate entity, that entity could take ownership of the franchise if necessary.
Still struggling with how much I can ask them, because it feels like we're stepping into place to do that. If their penalties are so extreme that they're not financially viable, and we put all of this money into that facility, we're gonna take the Hawks if they can't perform. And that's I get the sense I need to know how strong they are. I guess is the best way to put it. And I don't want to offend anyone, but I need to know how sound they are with this circumstance they're facing.
So one of the things that that this action is subject to our approving guarantee of the owner who is purported to have substantial assets, but as part of that transaction, we look at the guarantee and his financial ability, as well as the stock, but that's a major thing that we'll be looking at. And as we mentioned before, this doesn't require the executive director to execute this document, but permits him to. We have more due diligence to do with the rest of this things.
How long has the current owner been the owner?
4 years.
4 years. And paid about $7 million for it when it was at its bottom. It was really a sick franchise.
Is your question really, just so we can respond, is it that the entire investment of our dollars into the facility for you, the understanding that the long-term viability of Winterhawks is crucial to that, or are you focused
That
more
is
explicitly on the funding agreement side of it, which this part of the transaction is designed to ensure that we get the $10 million committed to the project, and if not, this is the mechanism to recoup whatever we put in. But if the bigger question is the long-term viability of Winterhawks, and if they're not viable, should we be doing a deal, then I think
That's kind of where
That's
I
kind
am.
of different,
It's connected. I understand the funding strategy and
Right.
timing. It's just bothersome because initially that was the biggest question. We were talking about putting in a significant amount of money into a building that, but for the fact I think it's on the historical register, we probably wouldn't be doing right now. As far as where they are, it matters significantly to me to get some sense that they can come through it, because a 4-year owner is not that long of an owner. And we're talking about a franchise they bought for $7 million, and we're asking them to put in 10, more than they paid for it. And they're giving us enough indication that that's a problem. And we're backstopping it with a $2 million, just in case they don't do it, we'll do it. And those are all signs to me that there are challenges with regard to their ability to perform. And I appreciate that we structured the funding the way we did, but I'm still concerned about committing. And I know we're not spending money right now, but if I'm them, I sit back and I run this as long as I can, and I say the more they put in, the more they're going to put in.
Did we go over the timing of their funding of the $10 million? Has that been?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So by July 2013, we would have their full amount, and I don't know when the rest of the project is going to be kicking off, but
That's when I understand. The $2 million contingency, I know you're saying we're not putting more money in, we're already committed at that level, but it's a different type of commitment.
I do believe, and this is expressing kind of more my view of the project, that we need, it's useful to separate out the two. Our investment in the building is in some sense us playing our traditional redevelopment role. So us putting in $17 million plus the $4 million loan is us making an investment in that facility and the district, because we know that one, the decision of the city has been to save the facility. It's now an historic property, so in order for us to revitalize the Rose Quarter, we need to invest in that facility. And I think, and once again, this is how I viewed it, regardless of whether the Winterhawks are playing in that facility or not. And then, so there's that, and then all the other pieces of this I think relate to how do we, us stepping in as a backup operator, this funding agreement, these relate to how do we give the Winterhawks the long-term kind of assurance that they can play in the facility. Those go away if the Winterhawks go away, right? I mean, that stuff, so, but then we're still left with our investment in a facility, which I think that's the decision you're making today is, do we believe that PDC should be making this level of investment in this facility that the City Council has determined is of importance to the community? I think that's a bigger question than just simply whether the Winterhawks are in the building or not.
I guess part of the question is how much would we be committing if we didn't assume the Winterhawks were going to be there? Would we be committing a $17 million plus potentially 2 more?
I think their $10 million investment is the leverage is the tipping point for that decision for us, the fact that we can leverage
Yeah.
our money, the cities.
And that's what we talked about initially when it came up. That was a big private investment for the type of facility we're looking at and what's going on with the Coliseum. But I agree with you. We own the building, i.e. we, city and PDC, we're joint in that ownership. And I've said it more than once. If we're going to have that as an asset, we need to make sure the asset is improved to the point that it can provide real returns. This has taken so long that you have to look at it. I know Chair Andrews, you've looked at it a long time, but the more we have to look at it, the more we pick it apart, and that's kind of where I'm getting. But I would agree with you. We own the asset. We're going to improve the asset. I'm looking at the fact it's a loan, $2 million for an ice floor. That's a Winterhawks related investment.
Yeah,
We need the comfort. I need the comfort of something else with regard to that franchise right now.
I think, yeah, for me, there are 3 reasons why I really think that we need to move this project forward. And the first one is just to follow up on Patrick's comment, and that is, as was mentioned earlier, it's like there's a big question mark on the outside of that building, and until the question mark is taken off, we're not going to be able to get any kind of redevelopment in that neighborhood, which is in a key location, which is in it's a great opportunity to get stuff done with the Vulcan land that's around it and the other folks. And it's also a key city asset in terms of, it's not just Winterhawks. There are 400,000 people a year that go through that facility. There's a lot of community events. There's a lot of other sorts of events. And I think what my due diligence has shown me is that, and Pam believes, over the last especially 5 or 6 years, as the facility has continued to deteriorate, it's hard to get the same people to come back, especially at the same cost, let alone bring new events. We are able, with the renovated facility, for example, I mean, they're planning on what is supposed to be the biggest in-season basketball tournament in NCAA history to go around Phil Knight's birthday, 80th birthday, 4 years out. 16 NCAA teams. They will play half the games in the Memorial Coliseum. They can't do the tournament without it. And that's kind of an example of one event that no other city can do. There are a few that come along every year where it's really necessary to have this and the Rose Quarter together to be able to bring those events in, which is economic development. So while I hear you that the Winterhawks are a key, and I think under the current situation they might even go through a difficult period of time, I think in the long run the Winterhawks are a key to the league. I think that they will be here. We have seen this thing operate at a time when they had attendance of 1,000 people. The last 2 games, their attendance was over 7,000. We don't know exactly what this might do to that over the next couple of years, but over the 10-year period, I think it's a viable investment, whether or not the Hawks go through a period of difficulty. I honestly don't see much risk associated with not having a Winterhawks team here. It may not be under this owner, but and the facility does provide a lot of return on investment even without them.
So I've completed my presentation.
Sorry for all the
These are the actions that are in front of you, the aggregate agreement and the draft license agreement. This will give authorization to the executive director to complete that. It would give us the authorization to proceed with the options as well as the project planning agreement, as we discussed.
So I think with Commissioner Dixon's conflict, maybe we should break these into 3 pieces. And again, if you're really not comfortable with this, we can wait for a final vote for 2 weeks. But I can assure you that we're not going to sign any deal that, at this point, the people who really, as sensitive as we are to the condition of the Winterhawks, OMF and PAM are even more sensitive because we don't have to deal with the issue except on a contingent basis 10 years out. So this is going to get a lot more scrutiny over the next few weeks as more is known by those organizations, and of course we'll be all over it as well.
Yeah, I mean, PAM and the city bear the risk of the operating performance of the facility, certainly for the next 10 years. And that's really when a lot of these, well, that's when these issues will play out. We need to see how not just how the Winterhawks perform, but also how the facility, if it's renovated, performs.
Well, and so before I call for a motion, I really want to thank the staff that has been working so hard on this. Peter in particular in the lead, and Eric and Faye and Gina and Mike, our outside counsel. I mean, I will tell you, we can text message at 6 o'clock in the morning, we can text message at 8 o'clock at night, it might be Saturday afternoon, we might spend a couple Saturdays in the office, but everybody has always been there and committed. And frankly, I've always been, as difficult as this is, all four of these parties, even though we're negotiating against each other or with each other, all really want this to happen at the end of the day. It's just 13 different contracts between 4 organizations. The RDA alone is 600 pages. Isn't
With all the exhibits.
With all the exhibits, it's 600 pages. It's unbelievable. Huge amount of work. And that's why we have so much invested in it today. So I would look for a motion to approve Resolution 6981, authorizing the Veterans Memorial Coliseum operating agreement with the City of Portland, authorizing Veterans Memorial license agreement with the Portland Winterhawks.
Well, since I caused all the pain, I'll move the motion.
And I'll second it.
Any further discussion?
No.
Yeah, I'd just like to say a few things. First of all, I really appreciate all of Commissioner Wilhoit's good questions this morning. I think this is important stuff to get on the table and to consider. And obviously he understands these numbers a lot better than I do, so I appreciate that. So I just want to say thanks for that. I want to also thank Chair Andrews, and I know you've spent a tremendous amount of time on this. This is probably the most unusual motion or set of motions or set of deals that we've ever looked at or acted on since I've been a commissioner. But I think in the long term, we'll come out of this. We'll be just fine. And I want to not only thank Chair Andrews, but the rest of the staff, just like you already did. I know there's a lot of people that put a tremendous amount of time and work into this, so thank you.
Any more?
No, I would just second that, and it is an asset that we have to invest in. I recognize that. I'm just sitting here as a commissioner. I think of all the possibilities, and sometimes it makes you ask questions that people wonder if you're on the team or not. I'm definitely on the team. I appreciate all the effort that people have put into the project, and I'm hopeful and optimistic that the Winterhawks will be fine. We do need them to be fine. I think everyone wants them to be fine. It's going to be in everyone's best interest, and I appreciate the additional discussion you provided regarding how many different ways that facility is utilized, because I lost sight of it. I keep forgetting that there are a lot of things when I go to a basketball game and there's an event over there. It's not always a Winterhawks game. Usually it isn't. There are things that go on throughout the year, and I think it's important for people to recognize that. So appreciate, Peter, your patience, because I did have a lot of questions, and I wanted to get comfortable with at least the sense of why we're doing this and why we're doing it at the level we are. And I'll be redundant and say I know how critically important it is to everyone that the Winterhawks, put in that capital investment, because that was driving our thinking early on. And one thing that I don't think anyone has really talked about is to leverage that type of private investment. There's no one else we can leverage that with right now with regard to the Coliseum, and it is important that we stimulate that area. And we need to show people who might be potentially investors around the area that we're willing to invest for the long-term view of the city. So thanks for all your effort. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And as unpleasant it was to hear the news yesterday come out, because I wasn't aware that there was an investigation going on. We're probably a lot better having it come out yesterday than next week. After we voted on this. At least we're walking into this with our eyes wide open.
And we can provide, we have a December 12th board meeting. obviously we can communicate with you, at all times, but to the extent that we have an update on this aspect of the deal, we can certainly provide that on December 12th while we're still in this 30-day period before the action becomes effective. So, I mean, and obviously, we have, not only do I have the ability to not move forward with the transaction, but we have a fiduciary duty to make sure you're aware of all facts on this. So we will be letting you know what we find out as the Winterhawks do their analysis and others. So.
Okay, so there has been a motion to approve. All those in favor, aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. I would now look for a motion to approve Resolution 6982, authorizing an option agreement granting PDC the right transfer of certain real property interests within the Rose Quarter from the City of Portland.
So moved.
Second. And you're allowed to weigh in on this one?
Well, I think that this sounds like the best part of the whole. So I'm pleased to be able to be voting.
Yeah, talk about the
And again, I just want to thank all the hard work. I know Chair Andrews, he is constantly calling and briefing all of the commissioners. I mean, and that's just part of the many thousands of different places that he's been throughout this transaction. So I know that he's done a tremendous amount of work on behalf of this deal going through, and as well as all the staff that has worked on it, Peter and Kevin Brake and Eric and Patrick, and I mean, the list goes on and on. This is a really complicated transaction, and I'm thankful to have all of you smart people around us to help have it get to this point, and look forward to seeing this project happening at some point. So thank you.
Any other discussion? All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? On to Resolution 6983, authorizing Veterans Memorial Coliseum project funding agreement to provide up to $2 million in contingent funding for the Veterans Memorial Coliseum renovation. This is one you've recused yourself from as well.
Yeah. So moved.
Second. Further discussion?
No.
All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, Peter. I get to do this again at City Council.
Good practice.
Okay, so that is the end of the agenda for the regular agenda. We are running a little behind, but I'm sure